it's the weekend, so that means it's time for yet another video on Zilog and Moto, your home for all things 8 and 16-bit Sega. Or, well actually this is my home, but you're more than welcome to visit. Just make sure you bring buffalo and blue cheese combos with you. And if you don't know what those are, go to 7-Eleven, they probably have some. And if you don't know what 7-Eleven is, well, now I'm just sad for you. Anyway, enough intro nonsense. Today's game is a port of an arcade title that quite possibly appeared at 7-Elevens and other convenience stores in 1988. And that game is Altered Beast. If you know anything at all about the Genesis or Mega Drive in Europe specifically, you're probably familiar with Altered Beast, at least in passing, as Altered Beast was the original packing game for those consoles before a certain spiky blue hedgehog burst onto the scene. And the packaging was iconic, with the front of the box having a picture from the game being played on the console, showing a still frame from the cinema sequence where your character turns into a wolf man surrounded by what looks like fire. From a console perspective in 1989, it was like nothing that had ever been seen before, and was emblematic of Sega's marketing that the Genesis could put the games of the arcades in your hands and in your homes. But first, let me take a step back for a second. The arcade version of Altered Beast first appeared in the arcades in June of 1988 and performed better in the United States and Europe versus Japan. And based on its somewhat bananas storyline that I'll get to in a bit, I kind of understand why. Altered Beast, being primarily a two-dimensional game, was designed for Sega's System 16 arcade hardware rather than the more powerful Super Scalar series boards, which made it a prime candidate for porting over to the Genesis, due to the System 16's similarity to the Genesis layout. And note, I did say similarity, as the System 16, no matter which version, is certainly more powerful than the Genesis. It's not a situation like the Neo Geo MVS and AES, where the arcade board and the home console are one and the same. Even though Altered Beast wasn't a pack-in title for the Japanese Mega Drive, it was the third game released, only following launch titles Space Harrier 2 and Super Thunderblade, coming out a mere 5 months after the arcade version's debut in November of 1988, and then, of course, appearing 9 months later for the Genesis launch in August 1989. To say that Altered Beast is an early 16-bit title is an understatement. So why was Altered Beast not quite as popular in Japan as it was in the United States and Europe? Well, that's hard to say, but it's possible, and I'm just theorizing here, that it has something to do with the game's content and storyline. Altered Beast's plot is decidedly not Japanese-based, and instead focuses on ancient European mythology. Also, the game is a bit of a tweener when it comes to what it actually is, with it ultimately being a side-scrolling action game, but that also contains beat-em-up characteristics. The game supports 1 or 2 players, which thankfully was replicated on the Genesis port, and I think a good portion of why it had the level of success that it did in Japan and then more so elsewhere, as it's definitely more fun with 2 players. So, Altered Beast has at least some cool cinemas apparently of your character morphing into a creature, but why does your character do that? And what does the rest of the game consist of? And does it hold up 32 years later? Well, we'll get to all that and more, but first, a look at the package. Okay, this, as you can see, is the Genesis version of Altered Beast. I actually don't have the Master System version yet. I'm not quite sure how I've managed that, but it is a later Master System release for the US market, so probably when I saw it previously, it was just out of my price range at the time. Anyway, I'm not sure if this was originally a pack-in title or not. Altered Beast didn't have a separate promo version like what's commonly out there for Sonic the Hedgehog and Streets of Rage 2. There are apparently 3 US versions floating around, which is determined by looking at the back. On this copy, if you look down at the bottom corner, it says Made in Taiwan, and also there's a few weird vertical lines. Those lines are a misprint, so there's also a version out there that's exactly like this, but without the lines. The third version that's out there has Made in Japan instead. Now, I'm not exactly sure why these different versions exist. Possibly some were always included as the pack-in, and some were always sold separately. I wasn't able to find specific information about it out there. But it makes sense that since this was the game packed in with the consoles, Sega would need extra copies produced along with the other 5 launch titles. And because of that, maybe they leveraged Taiwan for production as well as Japan, specifically for Altered Beast. With this misprint though, I can understand why Sega kept their early production in Japan for other titles. Moving on from this meaningless dribble to other meaningless dribble, you can see while the front cover is in good shape with no scratches or tears, the back cover isn't quite as lucky, with scrapes up and down the spine edge and the outer edge. I assume that at some point this was on some sort of rack that had rough edges, and they caught the plastic when it was pulled off the rack. The hang tab at the top has been removed as well, but thankfully whoever did the removal at least made a pretty clean cut on the seam. Thankfully these holes on the back haven't allowed any damage to the inner cover, and the inner cover is fully intact with no water damage, sun bleaching, or edge wear. As far as the cover itself goes, this is a great cover, and it's the original Genesis style, so you actually see a little more of the artwork, and it's not inset in a box. However, it's only half of the original art. For the full artwork, you'd have to have either the Japanese or Korean version that I'll display now so you can compare. It's too bad we didn't get this in the West because it looks awesome uncropped, but it's not like what we got looks bad. Flipping over to the back, instead of all that great artwork, we got the standard early back format with 3 really good quality screenshots, with a larger one at the top and then 2 smaller ones, each showcasing a different level. And actually, if you look at the flavor text on the side, the screenshots correlate with the levels being discussed by that color text, the first being from the first level, the second from level 2, and then the third from level 4. I can't really complain about this at all, especially not from such an early release. Opening the case, both the cartridge and the manual are in great shape. And I want to point out, this is a relatively simple arcade game, and more on that in a bit, but this manual is very thorough. Tons of screenshots and diagrams detailing how the game is played, but the best part is that each level is detailed with screenshots and concept art of all the enemies you'll face in the game. As much as I appreciate screenshots, I love seeing the concept art, as it just gives you a deeper view into the creation of the game. And it being an early release, there's a high score table at the end, carrying over from the Master System manuals. Okay, there's the package. Now let's get to the game, and try to decipher what should really be a relatively simple story. So, remember back a little ways when I was theorizing that the reason why the game possibly didn't do so well in Japan was because it's not a native Japanese story? Well, that may be true, or it may have nothing to do with it, but one thing is undeniable. It appears that the creators of the game probably weren't as familiar with European mythology as Westerner might be. And that's no slight at them, I'm certainly no expert on Shintoism or Buddhism. However, it does make the game's backstory a little bit confusing. The plot of the game is that you're a dead Roman centurion. However, even though you've shuffled off the mortal coil, so to speak, due to the fact that you were a mighty warrior in life, Zeus has decided to bring you back to life to save Zeus's daughter, Athena, who was kidnapped and taken to the underworld by Neph, a demonic god. However, if you're even somewhat familiar with Greek and Roman mythology, you might notice a problem here. Zeus and Athena are Greek deities, not Roman gods. So why is a Greek god resurrecting a Roman centurion to rescue his Greek god daughter? Wouldn't it have made more sense for Zeus to resurrect a Spartan? Or to at least use Zeus and Athena's Roman deity names, Jupiter and Minerva. I'm sure this is a minor thing that no one cares about, but minor things that no one cares about are the heart of this channel, if you weren't painfully aware. Also, I understand that the arcade version having this gaffe, but keep in mind the Genesis version came out well over a year later. They could have very easily changed things up in that time period with minor edits, much like they did in Space Harrier on the Master System by having Space Harrier take place in Dragonland versus the Fantasy Zone. But Sega of America chose just to let it roll as is. Okay, enough about all that. It's pretty clear that there's a goddess in need of rescue, and you're just the reanimated corpse to get the job done. But how are you going to do it? Even though you were once a mighty warrior, you've still got tons of dangerous mythical enemies standing between you and the underworld, and multiple confrontations with Neph, who is able to take 5 different and increasingly deadly forms to defend himself. Well, here's where the title of the game comes in. Altered Beast doesn't refer to any of the monsters that you face as you progress through the game, or Neph's various demonic forms. It refers to you. Let me back up for a second. Altered Beast is an arcade action title with combat elements where you have to make your way through 5 levels of enemies and bosses to ultimately save Athena. To start out the game, you're just a basic soldier who attempts to punch, kick, and jump their way through waves of enemies in a 2D left-to-right scrolling environment. However, to keep things interesting and to allow for you to keep up as the enemies and bosses slowly ramp up in difficulty as you make your way through the game, you can power your character up by collecting spirit balls that are dropped from special Cerberus-type creatures in the level. Like in the arcade version, you can collect 3 of these spirit balls per level, allowing you to first power up to just a stronger man, and then a bodybuilder reminiscent of classic Arnold Schwarzenegger, and finally you transmutate into the Beast, your strongest form, and one that has projectile attacks along with charged attacks for getting up close and personal, instead of just mere punches and kicks. The goal is always to collect the spirit balls as quickly as possible, not just for your character to get stronger, but because the level will literally end quicker, and you'll get more points for beating Neff when you encounter him. Let me explain. While you walk and jump through Altered Beast beating up enemies, it doesn't necessarily play like a beat 'em up. You don't have to fight every enemy, and some will make their own way off the screen. The Cerberi are definitely in that category, as they travel in packs as they cross the screen, and if you want those spirit balls, you have to be careful to position yourself in such a way that you'll be able to take them out, without them running you over or passing you because you weren't at the proper vertical level on screen. And you may need to play through a level several times to learn where they appear to prepare. Each section of the levels contains 3 packs of Cerberi to contend with the ideal goal being you collect a spirit ball from each pack and turn into the Beast. However, if this doesn't happen, Neff will disappear since you haven't achieved Beast form yet, and the level will continue with more waves of enemies in your way. If you're not great at collecting the spirit balls from the Cerberi, don't panic, as usually as you pass through the levels, the further you get, the easier the Cerberi are to kill, allowing you every chance to power up before the eventual confrontation with Neff. However, if you're incredibly masochistic, or just incredibly unlucky, you can fight Neff in human form on his 3rd appearance. I strongly wouldn't recommend it though. Finally, to keep things interesting, beat the end of the level monster that Neff turns into, and before you can move to the next level, he laughs at you and steals your spirit balls, forcing you to repeat the process in the next level. This cycle of constantly having to re-strengthen your character over serves 2 purposes. 1, if you were able to just play as the werewolf for the rest of the game after the first level, it would have become far too easy. And 2, the creators of the game knew that the only thing better than one beast you could turn into was multiple beasts. And the name of the game is Altered Beast, not Altered Werewolf. Each level in the game features a different beast you can turn into, and only repeats the werewolf on level 5, and even then you become a golden werewolf, which is basically the same as level 1, but at least they put a little effort into mixing it up a little bit. Also, each level's enemies and boss form of Neff are suited for the beast that you become, which is nice as well. As an added bonus, there's a cheat menu in the Genesis version that allows you to choose which beast you will become on each level, if you decide you want to try something different. I don't think this is terribly useful, but if you've already beaten the game and want something a little different so that you can squeeze every last little bit out of the cartridge, it's nice that they included it. Along with that particular cheat menu, the game has a few other nice bonuses. There's an options screen that's available by hitting the B button when pressing start at the beginning. That screen allows you to choose how much health to start out with, how many lives, what difficulty level the game is on, and which of the 5 levels you want to start on. Also, if you're playing the game and die on a certain level, you can hold the A button when pressing start when you return to the start menu, and you'll return to the last level you were on. It's not like how you could continue in the arcades by simply putting in another quarter and starting right back where you were, and instead you have to restart the level from the beginning, but it's enough, and the levels aren't terribly long anyway. Both of these features here are mentioned in the manual, so more reasons to keep and read your manuals. Lastly, there's a hidden sound test that's not listed in the manual, similar to the Beast Choice screen, which is nice because the game has probably more sound in it than you realize. I don't know why they hid it, but now you know it exists. So I've spoken pretty in depth about what Altered Beast is, but so far I've been pretty light on the actual critique. Let's get into that now, and I'll start with the in-game sound and music that I just referred to. As I mentioned, there's a decent amount of content here, especially for the size of the cartridge, which only weighs in at 4 megabits, or half a megabyte in non-video game measurements. Also, remember, with the Genesis' reliance on FM sound, it needs all the space it can get to hold quality samples. But each level has individual background music tracks, and there's also music for the start, end, and cutscenes in the game. And it's all pretty good and fits the game well. It's certainly not the best music on the console, but considering how early it is, I think they did a fine job, and it's a good representation of the arcade machine. Obviously the speech isn't quite as good, but "Rise from your grave" is still pretty iconic, along with the scream when you transform into beast mode. Like the sound, the graphics are better than I was expecting. As I said before, this is a System 16 title, so it's not tremendously more powerful than Genesis, but it does have abilities not native to the Genesis hardware, such as low-level scaling. There's not much scaling used in the arcade version, but there is some, most notably when certain enemies explode when you hit them, and the smoke when Neff transforms into his beast form. Other than that, all that's really missing is details here and there. The arcade version doesn't use a ton of colors, so not much is lost there in the port, and cutscenes like the beast transition or the between-level shots of Neff and Athena look completely intact. All of the enemies and bosses from the arcade version made the transition, and while you can tell where corners were cut if you look closely, you have to look really closely. Having said that, the Genesis version of Altered Beast was clearly the best version in existence during the 8 and 16-bit era, in graphics and all around. And strangely, Altered Beast was notable for having some really bad ports to other consoles and computers. The only version that even came close to the Genesis port was the PC Engine CD, with the Amiga and Atari ST versions, normally capable platforms at least graphically, looking especially rough. And the Famicom version is beyond awful. I don't know what Asmik was thinking when they released it, or why Nintendo even allowed it. So I've gone through what Altered Beast is, and how the Genesis version is a solid port of the arcade original, especially compared to its contemporaries. But what I haven't answered so far is the key question of, is the game any good? Clearly, if you like the arcade game, the Genesis version is a no-brainer now, and even more so 32 years ago. However, the game itself has issues. The controls in the game are simple and responsive, but they're maybe a bit too simple, as for the most part, you end up walking left and right across the screen and kicking things to death, at least until you're in beast mode, and then you'll usually only be injured due to making a mistake. And beyond the simplicity of the game, it's particularly short. Recording 2 complete playthroughs for this review took less than an hour, and that included the run where I specifically avoided spirit balls just to see what would happen. The Genesis version does support 2 players like the arcade, so I could see popping it in and beating it with a friend real quick, but 20 minutes later, you're going to be playing something else. This is a tough one to rate. On the one hand, it's a pretty solid technical achievement, especially considering it's trying to pack the entire arcade machine into a fourth of the space on the cartridge, and the fact that it was an incredibly early release. However, I think the Japanese might have been onto something here, and the game just isn't that great to begin with. Due to that, I'm giving Altered Beast on the Genesis 2 stars, and one of those is only because of the quality of the port. Play through it once, just so you can say you have, but I seriously doubt anyone in 2020 is coming back to Altered Beast, unless they just have fond memories of it being the first game they ever played on the brand new Genesis. Okay, that was Altered Beast on the Genesis. One of the reasons I like reviewing these games, and I've mentioned this before, but usually I learn something every time I do one of these when I'm researching the background for the game. Last week it was learning about oil patterns on boiling lanes. I knew the oiling the lanes was a thing, but I never knew they changed the patterns to make it more difficult for professionals. And this week it was learning that Zeus and Athena translated into Jupiter and Minerva in Roman mythology. I'd heard the names before, but I never realized the connection. Tune in next week when I go back to the Master System and look at a game recommended to me by @SynthSpaces on Twitter. And if you're not familiar with him, you should definitely go check him out. as he was a former Sega line staffer in the 90s, and he knows some things. He posted a picture the other day with some classic Master System titles in it, and then one of them stuck out like a sore thumb. So when I questioned him about it, he said that apparently they used to get a lot of calls about it. So next on the list it goes. Remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.